Welcome back to AU Family Channel, and thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world to have you as one of our loyal listeners. If our stories have ever touched your heart, we are so grateful that you keep coming back to spend this time with us. So find somewhere comfortable, take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin today's story, together. My piano teacher's name was Mr. Halloran, and for the last 2 years I studied with him. He was slowly going blind, and he never told me, and I did not find out until years later, long after I had stopped taking lessons, and when I finally learned the truth, it recontextualized everything about the man who had taught me not just music but a kind of quiet courage I did not fully understand until I was much older. I started lessons with Mr. Halloran when I was 9 years old, a nervous, unremarkable student sent to him by a mother who thought music might be good for me, and I remember him from those early years as simply a kind, patient older man, gentle in his corrections, endlessly encouraging even when my fingers stumbled over the simplest exercises. He had a small studio in his home, a single room dominated by a beautiful old grand piano, and I spent hundreds of hours in that room over the years, watching him listen, correct, demonstrate, guide, with a patience and a warmth that made even my most frustrating lessons feel safe. I did not know, in those early years, anything about Mr. Halloran's condition, a degenerative eye disease that had been slowly, quietly stealing his vision since long before I ever walked into his studio. He never mentioned it, never let it show in any way I could detect, and I went through years of lessons believing, simply, that he was an experienced teacher with sharp eyes for my mistakes, never suspecting that those eyes were failing him more with every passing month. The disease had been diagnosed years before I started studying with him. My mother told me much later, once I finally learned the truth, and the doctors had given him a timeline, a slow but inevitable progression toward total blindness, a fact he had absorbed and, somehow, decided to keep entirely private, continuing his teaching career as though nothing were changing, even as his actual vision deteriorated, month by month, year by year, throughout the entire time I studied with him. Looking back now, with the knowledge I did not have then, I can recall small signs I completely missed as a child, moments that make perfect sense now but meant nothing to me at the time. He sat closer to the piano than I remembered other teachers sitting. He asked me, more often as the years went on, to describe what I was doing rather than simply watching my hands. He began, in my final year with him, to rely more heavily on listening, correcting my playing by ear with an acuity that seemed, at the time, simply like the natural expertise of an experienced musician, but that I now understand was also a necessary adaptation, a compensation for vision that was steadily failing him. I want to tell you about who Mr. Halloran was as a teacher, because understanding his gift makes understanding his hidden struggle even more remarkable. He had an extraordinary ear, could identify a single wrong note buried in a complex passage instantly, could hear tension in my shoulders through the sound of my playing, could diagnose problems in my technique that I did not even know I had. I assumed, as a child, that this was simply the product of decades of musical expertise. I understand now that some of that extraordinary listening ability was also survival, a skill sharpened out of necessity as his vision slowly failed him and his ears became, increasingly, his primary way of understanding what was happening at the piano. There was a particular lesson, near the end of my time studying with him, that I remember vividly now, though I did not understand its full significance at the time. He asked me to play a piece I had been struggling with, and instead of watching my hands the way he always had, he closed his eyes, fully, and listened, his whole face turned toward the sound rather than the keyboard. I remember thinking it was strange, a small idiosyncrasy of an older teacher, and I did not think much more about it. I understand now that closing his eyes probably made very little practical difference to him by that point, that his vision had likely deteriorated to the point where watching and not watching yielded nearly the same information. I stopped taking lessons with Mr. Halloran when I was 15, the ordinary drift of adolescence pulling me toward other interests, and I did not think much about him in the years that followed, the way you often do not appreciate a formative teacher until much later, when distance gives you the perspective to understand what they actually gave you. I went on with my life, kept playing piano occasionally but never seriously, and Mr. Halloran became, in my memory, simply a kind, patient man from my childhood, someone I was grateful to but did not think about often. I learned the truth about his condition years later, at a chance encounter with my mother's old friend, someone who had known Mr. Halloran personally, who mentioned, in the middle of an unrelated conversation, how remarkable it had been that he continued teaching for as long as he did after his diagnosis, watching his vision slowly disappear while he kept walking into that studio, year after year, guiding students through their lessons with a skill that never publicly wavered even as the disease progressed exactly as the doctors had predicted. I remember the shock of that revelation, sitting there listening to details about a man I thought I had known, understanding, suddenly, that an entire dimension of my childhood experience had been completely invisible to me. Mr. Halloran had been going blind, slowly and inevitably, throughout every single lesson I remembered taking with him, and he had never let me see it, had never let his struggle become my burden, had simply continued teaching, adapting invisibly, giving me exactly the same quality of instruction I would have received from a teacher with perfect vision. I started asking more questions, once I understood the shape of what I had missed, trying to piece together the full picture of what Mr. Halloran had actually experienced during those years I studied with him. I learned that he had been diagnosed in his early 50s, well before I ever became his student, with a progressive condition that doctors told him would likely leave him completely blind within a decade or two, a devastating diagnosis for anyone, but particularly devastating, I imagine, for a man whose entire career depended on watching students' hands, reading sheet music, navigating a visual world of notation and technique. I learned that Mr. Halloran had made a deliberate decision, upon receiving that diagnosis, that he was not going to let it end his teaching career prematurely, that he was going to find whatever adaptations were necessary to continue doing the work he loved for as long as humanly possible. He began, my mother's friend told me, memorizing pieces of sheet music in advance, developing an extraordinary ear that could substitute for vision he no longer fully had, learning to navigate his own studio and his own piano with a precision built entirely on memory and touch rather than sight. I think about the courage that decision required, a man in his 50s, facing an inevitable and irreversible loss of vision, choosing to keep doing work that most people would assume required sight, developing an entire elaborate system of adaptation and compensation so that his students, myself included, would never even suspect the struggle happening behind his calm, patient exterior. He was not simply enduring his condition. He was actively, deliberately, working around it, year after year, so that the work he loved and the students he taught would never be compromised by his failing eyes. I learned that by the time I started lessons with him, at 9 years old, his vision had already deteriorated significantly, that the extraordinary ear I had always attributed simply to his musical expertise was, in fact, partly a necessary adaptation, a skill he had deliberately cultivated because he could no longer rely fully on his eyes to catch my mistakes. He had turned a devastating loss into an opportunity to develop a different, equally powerful way of teaching, one built on sound rather than sight, and he had done it so seamlessly that an entire studio full of young students, myself included, never suspected anything was different about him at all. I want to tell you about what it must have taken, practically, for Mr. Halloran to continue teaching as his vision failed, because I think the mechanics of his adaptation deserve to be understood and admired. He had to memorize, in advance, the pieces his students would be working on, so that he could follow along by ear rather than by reading the sheet music alongside them. He had to develop an acute sensitivity to sound, to the tiny variations in tone and rhythm that revealed exactly where a student's fingers were going wrong. He had to navigate his own studio, his own piano, with a precision built on memory and touch, never revealing, through any hesitation or fumbling, that his vision could no longer be trusted. I learned, too, that Mr. Halloran had continued driving to and from lessons, at least in the early years of his diagnosis, using whatever vision remained, and that as his sight deteriorated further, he had quietly arranged for other transportation, never explaining the change to his students, simply adapting, invisibly, to each new stage of his condition's progression. He had built an entire elaborate infrastructure of compensation and adaptation around himself, all of it invisible to the children he taught, all of it designed to make sure his failing eyes never became his students' problem. I asked my mother's friend why Mr. Halloran had kept his condition so completely private, why he had not simply told his students and their families what he was experiencing, and she told me that he had explained his reasoning once, in a conversation years before, saying that he did not want his students to treat him differently, did not want their parents to start doubting his ability to teach effectively, did not want the diagnosis to become a lens through which every lesson was viewed and judged. He wanted to be evaluated on the quality of his teaching, not on the sympathy his condition might generate, and he believed, correctly as it turned out, that he could continue delivering excellent instruction despite his failing vision, if only people did not know to doubt him. I have thought often about that reasoning, about the particular dignity and independence it reflects, a man refusing to let a devastating diagnosis become an excuse, refusing to let pity or doubt creep into his professional relationships, choosing instead to simply do the work, at whatever cost to himself, and let the quality of that work speak for itself. He did not want to be the piano teacher who was going blind. He wanted to be, simply, an excellent piano teacher, full stop, and he understood that revealing his condition risked changing that perception, risked having his very real skill overshadowed by sympathy or concern. I learned that Mr. Halloran finally retired from teaching a few years after I stopped taking lessons with him, when his vision had deteriorated to the point where the adaptations he had built could no longer fully compensate, when the risk of missing something important in a student's technique had finally grown too significant to responsibly continue. By the time he retired, I learned, he had been functionally teaching with severely limited vision, and eventually almost none at all, for the better part of a decade, guiding students through their most formative musical years using little more than his ears, his memory, and an extraordinary, hard-won skill at navigating a visual world without functional sight. I want to say something about what this means for the quality of instruction I actually received, because I think it deserves to be understood clearly. I did not get a diminished education because my teacher was going blind. I got, if anything, a more finely tuned one, because his adaptation to his condition had sharpened his listening to a degree that most sighted teachers never develop, had made him acutely, exquisitely sensitive to the sound of correct and incorrect technique in a way that visual observation alone might never have produced. His limitation had become, through years of deliberate adaptation, a different kind of strength, one that shaped how he taught me and, I suspect, made me a more attentive listener to my own playing than I might otherwise have become. I reached out to Mr. Halloran, once I learned the truth, tracking down his contact information through my mother's friend, uncertain whether he would even remember a student from decades before, uncertain how he would feel about the fact that his secret had finally, accidentally, become known to me. And he answered, warmly, remembering me immediately, and we spoke, for the first time as adults, about the years I had spent in his studio, years I now understood so differently than I had experienced them at the time. I asked him, in that conversation, why he had never told me, specifically, given how close we had been during those years of weekly lessons, and he told me that his reasoning had never been about any particular student, that it had simply been a blanket policy, applied consistently to everyone, a boundary he had decided to maintain not out of secrecy for its own sake but out of a genuine desire to be seen, by every student he taught, as simply a piano teacher, capable and skilled, rather than a subject of concern or special accommodation. He told me, too, something that moved me deeply, that teaching had become, during those years of his declining vision, more important to him than ever, not less, that the work had become a kind of anchor, a proof to himself that his condition, devastating as it was, had not diminished his fundamental capability, that he could still do something he loved, still do it well, still give genuine value to the students who walked through his door every week, regardless of what was happening to his eyes. Teaching, during those hardest years, was not something he continued despite his diagnosis. It was something he clung to precisely because of it, a demonstration to himself that he was still fully capable, still fully himself. I learned, from that conversation, about the particular courage it takes to keep doing the work you love while a devastating condition slowly, inevitably progresses, to find whatever adaptations are necessary rather than simply giving up the identity and purpose that work provides. Mr. Halloran could have retired the moment he received his diagnosis, could have decided that a piano teacher going blind was simply an impossibility, could have accepted a smaller, more limited version of his professional life. Instead he chose to adapt, aggressively and creatively, finding new ways to do the same essential work, refusing to let his condition write the final chapter of his teaching career before he was ready to write it himself. I think often about how differently I would have experienced those years of lessons if I had known, at the time, what Mr. Halloran was actually navigating, and I am honestly not sure whether knowing would have made me a more grateful student or simply a more anxious one, watching for signs of struggle instead of simply learning music. There is something to be said for his choice to keep it private, for the way it let our relationship remain exactly what it needed to be, a teacher and a student, focused entirely on the music, unclouded by pity or concern or the particular awkwardness that sometimes accompanies knowledge of someone else's suffering. I learned, from Mr. Halloran's example, about the difference between hiding a struggle out of shame and choosing privacy out of dignity, a distinction I had not fully understood until I heard him explain his own reasoning. He was not ashamed of his condition, did not view it as something disgraceful to be hidden from the world. He simply understood that revealing it to his students would change the nature of their relationship in ways he did not want, would introduce pity or doubt or special treatment into a dynamic that he believed worked better without it. His privacy was not shame. It was a considered choice about the kind of teacher he wanted to be for the children in his care. I asked Mr. Halloran, in our reunion conversation, what his life looked like now, years after his retirement, fully blind, and he told me, with a warmth that surprised me, that he still played piano every single day, that his hands had memorized decades of music so thoroughly that his blindness had changed almost nothing about his own personal relationship with the instrument, that he still found the same joy and meaning in music that had drawn him to teaching in the first place. His blindness had ended his career, eventually, but it had never touched the actual love of music that had always been the real center of his life. I learned, hearing this, about the particular resilience of the things we truly love, the way a devastating loss can end one chapter of a relationship with our passions while leaving the deepest core of that relationship completely intact. Mr. Halloran lost his sight, lost his ability to teach, lost a career he had built over decades. He never lost his love of music, never lost his ability to sit at a piano and find, in the keys under his fingers, the same joy that had first drawn him to the instrument as a child. That core survived everything, and it comforted me, hearing him describe it, to understand that his life, even now, fully blind, was still full of the thing he loved most. I want to say something about what Mr. Halloran's hidden struggle teaches about the invisible battles so many people are fighting, quietly, behind whatever composed exterior they present to the world. I spent years in that studio, believing I understood the man in front of me, and I understood, in reality, only a carefully constructed surface, beneath which an entire invisible battle with a devastating diagnosis was unfolding, week after week, year after year, completely hidden from my view. I have wondered, since learning the truth, how many other people in my life might be fighting similarly invisible battles, adapting to struggles I cannot see, presenting a composed exterior that conceals far more than I will ever know. I have carried that awareness with me since, a particular humility about how much of other people's actual experience remains invisible to us, no matter how well we think we know them. Mr. Halloran taught me piano for 6 years, and I thought I knew him reasonably well, and I understood, learning the truth, that an entire dimension of his experience during those years had been completely hidden from me, not through any deception exactly, but through a deliberate, dignified choice to keep his struggle private. I try to remember that lesson now, extending a particular grace and curiosity to the people in my life, understanding that their composed exteriors may be concealing struggles I cannot see or imagine. There is an image I carry now, retroactively applied to memories I have had for decades, an image of Mr. Halloran sitting at that piano, listening with his whole face turned toward the sound rather than watching my hands, an adaptation I completely misread as simple musical devotion at the time. I understand now what that posture actually meant, the quiet, invisible courage of a man navigating a devastating condition while giving his young student exactly the instruction he needed, never once letting his own struggle become visible, never once letting it diminish the quality of what he gave me. I asked Mr. Halloran, near the end of our reunion conversation, whether he had any regrets about keeping his condition so completely private, whether he wished, in retrospect, he had told his students and let them understand and appreciate what he was actually navigating. And he said, without hesitation, that he had no regrets at all, that his choice had let him give his students exactly what they needed, an excellent musical education, uncomplicated by pity or special accommodation, and that this had mattered more to him than any recognition he might have received for the courage his adaptation actually required. I learned, from Mr. Halloran's entire story, about the profound dignity available in simply doing your work well, without announcement, without seeking recognition for the invisible struggles that work might require you to overcome. He did not want credit for teaching piano while going blind. He wanted, simply, to be a good piano teacher, and he achieved that, consistently, for years, through an adaptation and a courage that almost no one around him ever knew to appreciate. I think that quiet, unrecognized excellence deserves more honor than the world usually gives it, and I try, in whatever way I can, to give Mr. Halloran that honor now, even decades after the fact. I still play piano occasionally, all these years later, and every time I sit down at the keys, I think of Mr. Halloran, of the extraordinary hidden courage behind the patient, gentle teaching I received as a child, of the invisible battle he fought, week after week, so that my musical education would never be compromised by his own devastating condition. I try to carry his example forward, not just in music but in everything, a reminder that true excellence often requires invisible adaptation, invisible courage, invisible battles that the people benefiting from our work may never fully understand or appreciate. So this week, I want to ask you to consider the possibility that the people around you, the ones who seem simply competent, simply composed, simply capable, may be fighting invisible battles you cannot see, adapting to struggles that never make it into your understanding of who they are. Extend them a particular grace, a particular curiosity, and understand that excellence, real excellence, so often requires courage and adaptation that goes completely unnoticed by the people who benefit from it. Mr. Halloran taught me piano for 6 years while quietly losing his sight, and I never knew. I wonder, now, who else in my life might be doing something similar, and I try to notice, and to honor it, whenever I possibly can. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It truly means the world that you are here. If Mr. Halloran and his quiet, invisible courage moved your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to AU Family Channel, where a brand new story is waiting for you every single week. And remember what a piano teacher who was going blind taught a student who never even knew. Excellence often requires invisible battles that we never fully see, and the people around us deserve our grace and our curiosity, because we rarely know the full weight of what they are quietly carrying. I will see you in the next one.